It's a beautiful day in St. Louis. It feels a little more like Easter. It was fun to watch so many of you biking in and walking in today from home, you who could. I'm glad you did. You know, the students get pretty used to tests around here, so I'm going to give you a test. But I don't want you to respond out loud. But I do want you to count on your fingers, because this is a true or false test. True or false? God punishes, and hell is God's punishment for our sins. True or false? True or false? I have been good, I have prayed hard, I go to Mass every Sunday, I can expect that God will be good to me, and that success in my life is more likely because I am so faithful. True or false? God has a plan for my life. I just need to figure out what God's plan for me is. True or false? Everything that happens is God's will. True or false? Jews and atheists and Muslims cannot go to heaven because they do not believe in Jesus and have never been baptized. True or false? God never gives us more than we can handle. True or false? God is always judging us, and hell is God's ultimate judgment on us. True or false? Because God is all-powerful and can do anything, God can keep a woman from being raped, a car accident from happening, a tsunami from flooding Japan. God can keep murder from happening if God chooses. True or false? True or false? God tests us. God gives us suffering to teach us something. Death is God's will. One last one for now. True or false? God is in control of everything and of my life. True or false? Every one of those statements is false. Oh, don't be nodding your head up and down. Yeah. Shh. Judgment. God gets a bad rap. We have so many wrong notions of who God is and how God works that it is not a surprise that God is barely recognizable anymore for believers even, and that so many have given up on faith because of wrong notions they have of God. And so many of the rest of us, because of these notions of God, get passive-aggressive at God himself. We get passive-aggressive at God when God does not do his magic on us because ... And so we pout and we refuse to go to church and we refuse to pray because of the suffering in our lives or in the world. We get passive-aggressive. We really do at God. We get mad at God. And those that still practice, those who are faithful, still find it difficult to trust God with their lives, to surrender their life to God because these notions of God we believe in have made it difficult to trust our lives to God. And I have to say this, and I think you would agree probably if you thought about it for a second, for sure. Much of Christian history represents a God different than the one Jesus revealed and represented. Much of human Christian history represents a God different than the one Jesus revealed, than the God Jesus revealed and Jesus represented. We have managed somehow to develop an unworkable and toxic image of God that a healthy person would never trust. We wouldn't trust human beings if we thought of them as we think of God, and if we think they do what we think God does, what we attribute to God. The mystical and the transformative journey cannot take place until those images are undone. Let me say that again. The mystical transformative journey cannot take place until that image is undone. Why would any of us want to spend an hour in silence or intimacy with such a God? I see it all the time. We suffer. You and I actually suffer from a partial image of God and even a false image of God. And it keeps us from moving forward in faith. It's keeping us from growing in faith. Jesus spent a lot of time trying to correct people's wrong thinking about who God is and how God works in our lives. That God is at work in our lives is not a question, but what we attribute to God and how God works in our lives is on the table. It is a question, and it's hugely important. In this gospel, you hear clearly that the people of his day thought that bad things happen as God's punishment for our sins. They thought that bad things happened in our lives or in the world because of punishment for our sins. Let me just read their questions to Jesus. Or Jesus' questions to them because of what they were thinking. Do you think that because these Galileans suffered like that, they were greater sinners than all other Galileans? His answer clearly, no, he says, no, by no means. Are those 18 people who were killed when the Tower of Siloam fell on them, do you think they were more guilty than everyone else who lived in Jerusalem at the time? Were they guilty of something that tower crushed them to death? Innocent, standing there just doing their day, and the tower fell on them, and they're dead? And somebody's doing their funerals, and somebody's wondering why God did this to them, and Jesus says, do you think that's because they were guilty of something? And he answers his own question that he hears from them. No, by no means, he said. Their sin has nothing to do with their death. Indeed, Jesus spent a lot of time trying to correct people's wrong thinking about who God is and how God works in their lives. There's other places in the Gospels too. Remember when they said to him, Jesus, who sinned that this man was born blind? Was it him or was it his parents? And again, Jesus essentially answers the same way. Sin has nothing to do with blindness. Blindness just happens. It's nobody's fault that this man is blind. Bad stuff just happens in this world, and that's because this world is always evolving into something new, and there's a lot that's on the table when that happens. And I have to say to you clearly, what Jesus is doing in this gospel, which is correcting people's wrong-headed notions of God, is one of the most important things I do as a priest. Granted, many of these false notions of God are all over the Old Testament, the Jewish Bible, the Bible Jesus read, and the Bible Jesus believed in. Those notions of God are in there, but there are other notions of God in there as well. Notions that say all those attributes, that sing the attributes we just sang in that responsorial psalm. That God is compassionate, that God is merciful, kind, faithful, always liberating and healing. That's God's work. That's what God does all day long and all night long. That's what God is doing for you and for me and for the world all the time. Liberating and healing. And in that story of Moses in the first reading today, it's clear. Moses is being sent in God's name to liberate and heal his people. Do this for me, Moses. These people are suffering. I hear they're suffering. Please, please help me liberate them. Help me heal them, please. That's what God does all day and all night long. Nothing else. And those are the notions that Jesus crystallized from the Old Testament, from the Jewish Bible. Those are the notions that Jesus crystallized in his own self and in his teaching and brought forward from that Jewish Testament. He brought them forward so that the New Testament becomes in Jesus the best of the Hebrew thought about God brought forward to our day. Not new notions about God, mind you, but the best of their tradition he brings forward into our day. Yet you and I still don't get it. And when suffering comes our way and we have a bad day, poor God. We still worship a God more like Zeus, you and I, let's be honest, than the power of powerless love that was Jesus and is the wisdom of Jesus about the mystery we call God. And it's all right there in that cross, if you take the time to meditate on it. If that is Zeus in flesh, that's a very different God than the Greeks believed in. Look at that, powerless love. Nothing victorious in that moment of his life. Every one of those true and false statements could be a different homily. I could argue with you about any one of them. I could teach a class that would go an hour and a half on all of them and still not be complete. But every one of those true and false statements, what I need to say clearly just for today is that Jesus dismisses them as pure poppycock. Perhaps they are projections of our ego needs onto the mystery of God, our insecurities because we want to have some sort of security, at least in this world. Perhaps it's our desire to have a Santa Claus still that gets in the way, or some grand puppeteer, or some magician pulling the strings for each of us to give us the security that we don't know or we do not have. You and I, need to be done with that now, as of this Mass, forever. And I need you, and Jesus needs you, to help correct people who think like that, because you're going to hear it in mortuaries and hospitals and in living rooms and at dinner tables all the time. Somebody's got to start preaching the God Jesus loved and believed in and was intimate with and expressed in his own person. We need to be done with that now and for the rest of our adult lives in faith. Period. End of sentence. Every one of the statements is false. The greatest insight of the followers of Jesus, you know well, they got from him, is that God is love. Perfect love. Absolute love. And if you love your kids, tell me this, parents, you know this in your bones. If you love your children and would not do what you think God does to people, how dare you say that God would do that? How dare you say that God would do something to you, his children, to children in the human family, that you would never do to your kids, even if it was teaching them or helping them grow? You wouldn't cause them blindness. You wouldn't have them give birth to a dead baby. You wouldn't let some woman your daughter be raped because she might learn something from it. Are you kidding me? How dare we do that to God? Tell me, parents, would you let your kids suffer that kind of suffering just so that it would teach them something? No, I really know you wouldn't. If that's true for you, then how dare you think God would do that, who loves your kids and the kids of this world even more than you do? More than you do. Why this matters is because of this. The image of God creates us. The image we have of God creates us, or it defeats us. There's an absolute connection between between how you see God and how you see yourself and how you see the whole universe. We become the God we believe in. And if you believe that God is punitive and punishing and enforcing and violent and judging and controlling, then you will be that for the people in your life. That is why it's important to see God as loving and benevolent and generous and merciful and kind, because that's who you're going to become if that's how you see God. Good theology, correct thinking about God is still and so crucial. So I leave you with one last true and false question. And I hope I don't have to tell you the right answer on this. In the light of that gospel, in the light of what I just taught, in the light of that gospel, true or false? It matters more that we have the right notions of God and how God works than even that we believe in God. True or false?